addresses ways that we as educators and directors assign, cast, give out scenes, specifically in my case for a beginning scene class. And really when I started realizing how many non-binary students I was having in a class, it really made me reflect again on how much power there is in assigning gender, race, ability when we're assigning these scenes. And the idea of, well, I found just the right scene here. Here's an African-American scene for you. And then intersectionality of gender and sexual identities. All of that made me want to do an experiment, and I'll be talking about that. But these other folks have addressed it in delightful ways. I've learned from them, and Libby, Margaret, Boone, and Leslie Ann have their own ways that they've addressed issues around this. And so I really appreciate you being here. We're going to each share our thoughts, and at the end we'll have some time, hopefully, for some discussion, because I think this is a pretty common challenge that we all have. All right, well, I will start with our next slide here. With Libby. Libby's assistant professor of theater at the University of South Carolina at Beaufort? Beaufort, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Beaufort. It's beautiful. And Libby is going to be talking about motivated, not blind casting using acting scenes to encourage questions about canonicity and normativity.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to present, but I'm even more excited to sort of engage in conversations afterwards because I've been at Beaufort for 2 years. It seems like 30 in terms of the program, and we run into some interesting challenges there that I'll get into right now. But I'm sure some of you have similar experiences, and I'm interested to hear what solutions you have found work for you as well. Okay, so without further ado, the University of South Carolina at Beaufort is a small, public, inexpensive, comprehensive 4-year regional campus whose service areas include Hilton Head, as well as one of the poorest counties in South Carolina. While those students in Beaufort County benefit from an exemplary school system, other students graduate from high schools in what is infamously referred to as the corridor of shame. The counties that compose this area of South Carolina are consistently rated the lowest quality of education in the country, year after year. My students are diverse along just about any vector imaginable: race, gender, identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, etc. Because of these variables, it is important to me to make plain the forces that construct the normative case. Theater and its tendency toward a default casting case of straight, white, and middle class can be one of those forces, especially when looking at canonical works. Therefore, I often assign public domain scenes to allow students the freedom to rework classics through their own experience, rather than trying to adapt their experience to the classics. Often without changing any text at all, my students are able to find ways to shape the text to their narrative. In doing so, they learn the empowering lesson that standard interpretations of texts and the values associated with them are arbitrary, constructed, and malleable. I choose public domain text because I think it is important for students to understand that, were they so motivated, they could go out into the real world and perform these scenes in their own subversive ways. I don't take lightly the task of assigning scenes to my fundamental of acting students. It's a tricky sort of thing. Scenes are assigned early in the semester before I have a chance to really get to know the students. Students are asked to find partners and often find themselves coupled with almost strangers. I recognize my position of privilege, the arbiter of scenes. That's not the only privilege that I enjoy. As I shuffle through scene options in my office, plucking potential texts for each pairing, I am keenly aware that I am well represented. The same cannot be said of many of my students. I've looked to acclaimed playwrights of color and plays with characters of color, but this too has its problems. My students of color from rural South Carolina don't relate to Susan Lori Parks or August Wilson. These playwrights tend to write about individuals from more urban or suburban environments. The students inform me that's not their experience. Likewise, the problems of representation are not limited to race. rather than try to manipulate their understanding of their experience or guess at their identity, I would rather give them the opportunity to manipulate the culture, to shape cultural artifacts to reflect their experience. I've given consideration to asking students to write their own scenes. Actors in my intermediate acting class are expected to create their own material. The challenge with fundamentals of acting is that it serves as a fine arts requirement. Most of the students taking the course are first years, just learning how to college. The moment I ask them to write a scene, they shrink. In our context, many students could, no doubt, write their own scenes, amazing scenes. But they are so overwhelmed by racing to acquire many of the basic college skills that students at other institutions arrive with, that each new task can seem like an act of intimidation. Asking them to have confidence in their ability to learn acting is a tall enough task, without adding the pressure of asking them to write for themselves and their peers. Again, this is no reflection on their abilities. It is instead an attempt to build their confidence and not scare them off of the arts before they've had a chance to come to understand what they're capable of. I never want a student to feel like I'm typing them. I've had that experience in my own education, and I'm sure many of you have as well, and it's kind of icky feeling. I do, however, want to assign roles that are accessible, by which I mean the roles that I think, based on each student's skills and inclinations, will provide them with the best tools for telling the story that they want to tell and making the statement they want to make. Truth be told, most contemporary scenes I might select favor characters that would appeal to a very particular audience. The modern canon privileges those plays performed by New York actors, in New York theaters, written by New York playwrights. I have no desire to privilege those stories. And so I'd rather ask my students to take a classical text and view it as malleable. Partners are encouraged to create a concrete world and use the given text to enhance their story. I always give my students a choice. They're welcome to tackle contemporary scenes that I provide, and truth be told, many are too intimidated by the seemingly archaic language and perceived cultural preciousness to touch Shakespeare. My guess is students were taught to revere the work of the bard, to hold it as the finest example of writing ever. And so, when I stroll into a classroom and offer them the opportunity to gender bend Cassius and Brutus, or to explore how Twelfth Night changes when Olivia and Viola are two African-American women in 2017 living on the Sea Islands, the reaction is often skepticism. After all, who am I, who are we, to change what was intended? When I ask how they know what was intended in the first place, I'm greeted with some blank stares and one or two adamant defenders of preservation. I then inform students, most of whom are unaware of this fact, of the fact that Shakespeare himself was taking already existing cultural artifacts and reworking them for his place, time, and audience. Shakespeare's works are not blank or empty, but they can be the raw material for creating new cultural products. It's the bones of a home. We can strip away what is unnecessary and build upon the original structure. I am always shocked at how many college-age students watch HGTV. I don't know if that's your experience, but like that metaphor would not have worked on a 20-year-old Libby. It, however, always hits home for my student base. So. The language of the scenes assigned is difficult, not just because it's arcane and grandiose, but because it's homophobic, classist, misogynistic, and overwhelmingly racist. I implore my students to not shy away from critiquing that in their performance. How might they challenge these ideas through performance? How does it change the way we hear language if Cassius and Brutus are played by two women? I don't want them to shy away from the problems in the text. I want them to use their performance to point out and critique those things in a way that they could not as easily do with works under copyright. At the end of the day, I'm trying to give them agency over the text. And not just agency over any text, but over the text. Does that do violence to the text? Well, I don't think so. But even if it did, I think Shakespeare can probably take it. And the upswing is that our students practice being confident in their own voices and reaffirm to themselves that they have the right to speak about their own experience and talk back to materials they read in their courses and to the culture as a whole. I do not, of course, bestow upon them that right. I only provide them a space in which they are comfortable getting to exercise it. Thank you.
Professor of Theater and Dance and Head of Acting at University of California, Davis. And Margaret, I'll turn it over to you. And if you can toggle through slides here if you've got them up there and the folks can see.
I'm not going to read paper. The voice is one of my areas of focus in my work. And I love it because it comes out of the body and it starts with the breath. And it's incredibly personal. And that's why I'm not reading paper. The right way to speak. The first time my brother says ain't, my mother pulls a branch from the willow tree growing down by the hill edge of our backyard. She slips her hand of clothes over it, removes the leaves. My brother begins to cry because the branch is a switch now. No longer beautifully weeping at the bottom of the hill, it whirs as my mother whips it through the air and down against my brother's legs. You will never say ain't in this house, my mother says. You will never say ain't anywhere. Each switching is a warning to us. Our words are to remain crisp and clear. We are never to say, huh, ain't, y'all, get, or gonna. Never ma'am. Just yes, with eyes meeting just enough to show respect. Don't ever ma'am anyone. The words are too painful a memory for my mother of not so long ago Southern subservient days. The list of what not to say goes on and on. We are from the north, our mother says. We know the right way to speak. As the switch raises in the dark welts on my brother's legs, Dell and I were gone, afraid to open our mouths, fearing the South will slip out or into them. That is from Jacqueline Whitson's Brown Girl Dream. In the book, The Wake, so the quotes will come, I'm not going to read them or read it. In the book The Wake by Christina Sharp, she takes into account the many definitions and resonances of the word wake. The keeping watch with the dead, the path of ship, the consequence of something, being in the line of flight or sight, awakening consciousness. Sharp explores being in the wake as a form of consciousness. Briefly here, I would like to explore applying these ideas to the practice of performing and teaching theater as a kind of wake work. Most imperatively, it is about the nature and the mechanics and the stakes of this kind of work. I think it's important just to think about what do I mean by wake and what is wake? In the wake of a new demographic landscape, in the wake of the disappeared, in the wake of redlining, in the wake of school busing, in the wake of Ferguson, in the wake of I have to do it, Y'all gonna take over. How many shots did Dylan Roof fire? In the wake of the Pulse nightclub massacre, in the wake of civil rights, not equal rights, in the wake of LA, Detroit, Ferguson, in the wake of Planned Parenthood, in the wake of genocide retold as legend, in the wake of Kennedy, King, Evers assassinations, in the wake of the president who won't sleep in the White House as it was recently inhabited by black folk, in the wake of dying polar bears, in the wake of the disappeared, in the wake of traumatized generations, in the wake of Hamilton, in the wake of Michigan's poisoned water, in the wake of living in your car, in the wake of call me Mr. Tibbs, in the wake of English, reading English for your family, in the wake of Natasha Parlins, in the wake of national spectacle of death as entertainment, in the wake of the Great Flood, in the wake of what is in the wake for you. Knowing and acknowledging what is in the wake, we are able to access what Susan Mory Parks refers to as rep and vision in her use of language and sound. Ways of accessing two dimensions, past, present, in working at the same time. I find similarity in something I read about Arthur Miller, recounting the 24 hours of Willie Loman's frustrated life and death of a salesman. Miller uses language to create what he felt was a new form of theater that would convey simultaneously a way of the past and memories, events colliding in one's own mind, and I will say in one's body, with current occurrences. Seeing tension in the very stuff of drama, Miller wanted to create in the play what he saw contradictory forces that operate on people. Past being present, society against individuals, greed against ethics. His first title for this play was Inside of His Head. Won't go away. It's a clip from Imitation of Life, and I find it very moving because it takes place in a classroom. And working with different textbook students, I often find them responding very much in a similar way that what happens to Sarah Jane when you are the only student of color, or you're the only Vietnamese student, you're the only black student, and now we've brought up that subject of race, and I can feel that student, just a little bit of, do we have to? And a part of my work is, how do we bring this into the classroom in a way that it's always present? It doesn't come up on the last 3 days at the end of the quarter when we have a little bit of extra time, and now we're going to bring up that play. And you're going to talk about it. Wow. How do we start to bring this into classroom as a dialogue? So I thought it was useful to start a list of questions that sort of are in the wake of my being as language that I can draw upon as part of my teaching. Where is the past present? Who has the responsibility to tell this story? What is its relation? What is your relationship to English? What is your relationship to forbidden words? What is the relationship to nonverbal sounds? Where is religion politics? Where is time? Who has the time? Who are the disappeared? Who is neutral? Where is neutral? Where is shame? What supremacy is dominant in this framework? Where has it been planted? Where are memories in the body? Who planted it? Where is it thriving? Where is the map? What is on the map of your tongue? What ization has culture taught? What ization is at play here? What ization has schooling taught? What can an act of violence decouple you from your DNA? Does this work fit into normal categories, and should it be a subcategory, such as political theater, sociology theater, anthropology theater, identity politics theater, protest theater, and why? I suggest this questioning as a type of community making where we can all participate, or maybe all of your students can participate in building a dialogue of questions that help us to navigate these times in the wake, because they're not going away. What are the stakes of disregarding wake work? That's just a question. Can this be a method of finding sustainability in our work? By taking care physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, we are better prepared to enrich and defend our communities and create art. I'd just like you to think about the idea as sound and how it is used in society. Sound as violence. Is that right? To think about sound as violence and go next step.
Okay, next.
I have a performance called Creative Instructions, where I talk about the body and the language that's in the body. And it includes a community engagement where I go into communities and talk about sound. But where I start with the conversation of sound is just on naming practices in communities. This is just a little clip of that. Just show a little clips. And then the last, this is Kalisha Township in South Africa. And the next slide, just a second, is a project I did at UC Davis. It's an endurance performance of digging, and around digging, students were invited to write about the landscape of Ferguson as a way of creating a dialogue of the actions around Michael Brown's passing. So I've tried to investigate layers of storytelling by being able to see the students in the library, by being able to see me through the window, moving the dirt, and then having the voices of the students, using the landscape of the library to investigate the storytelling and the nature of storytelling through the work. Investigating sound and music. I told you it wasn't a fake.
Better words plug, going to tinyurl.com/ATHE, assigned representation. You can hear the sound and see the full videos. The internet connection cut us out a little bit. Throw the internet under the bus. But thank you so much. Did you?
There are other quotes. I just intended just to speak and have them running. I thought it was just going to be kind of flowing thing.
All right, well, thank you so much, Margaret. Next, I'll introduce Leslie Ann Timlick, an associate professor at Florida International University, where she served as chairperson, artistic director, and head of actor training. Leslie.
Anybody need to stretch? I do. All right, we're sitting here and listening and all of that sort of thing. You know, when I looked in the book and it said gender crossing through performance pedagogy, I went, what was I thinking when I gave that title to John 3 months ago? Because when we make these titles up, we know what we want to say, but sometimes the title is just not really jiving. So what the heck was I thinking? If I had to retitle my presentation today, I would rename it Creating a Home for Gender Diversity in Actor Training. Because what I'm trying to do is find ways to best serve students and make them feel at home who are gender variant. I vowed I wouldn't get political when I started working on this session. A few months ago, I could say that in this country we were really crossing over into new territories and levels of acceptance. Our leadership was taking a swipe at making us more equal. But new leadership, new ideas, say one thing, do another. Vow to protect LGBTQ, I hope I said it better than he did, in your campaign, and quickly start doing the opposite and incite more transphobia. We have a lot of work to do to ensure that we counteract this in our acting studios. I'm sure all our journeys into theater and higher education are quite different, but I think there's probably a similarity there. Perhaps many of you, as I did, fell in love with stories when you were young. Some crazy, smart person took you to the theater, and you saw those universal stories come to life with others in a darkened room with light, sound, emotions, voices, bodies, moving through space. Movies were amazing, but this theater thing was alive and right in front of you. It spoke to you and it grabbed you in a way that nothing else did. And you felt like you were home. You could feel it right in your bones. And maybe even your breath pattern changed. Some of you may have discovered it much later, but somehow you got involved and you were studying and training in a higher education environment. And you learned how even more powerful it could be. Speaking out against things, shaping and recording history, and you read plays that spoke to you. The theater had the power to record history. You learned that, to speak out and make change. It was definitely the right and only place for you. The acting, the voice, and movement training was hard, but it challenged everything you had. But you knew that you were in the right place. The actor makes unclear specific. The tough thing about acting is we must improve our self-image and become more self-actualized and strip away the masks we hide behind in order to absorb all the intricacies and fine distinctions of the fiction that we're trying to recreate on stage. Today, more than ever, many students struggle to find their own true self-image. The authentic self has been distorted in the socialization process. We ask them to connect, take risks, be free, use their voices, bodies, emotions, and imaginations. However, much of this has been squeezed out of them so that they can sit in those tiny little desks, hour after hour, learning all those wonderful things for those standardized tests. No child left behind, correct? Well, I challenge that one. We have become a writing and reading society that feels more connected to expressing themselves through stock images, emojis, texting little post-it notes to each other, rather than maintaining eye contact and making connection. But what, my friends, if we added another layer to this journey towards self-actualization? Let's step into the possible experience of a gender-variant student, of what a gender-variant student might experience. What would it feel like to not feel comfortable with your assigned gender, or to feel more gender fluid, or not feeling connection to either gender? The inner and the outer don't feel connected, and acting is all about that. Not feeling at home in your own body. Something is dying to be expressed there, but it feels stifled. And you're trying to figure this out. Perhaps you're afraid and you begin playing a role that you were not meant to play to fit in. Your self-image gets a double whammy during the socialization process. Society and your body, the society and the body assigned to you this gender role, you don't feel comfortable in. As one of my students told me, my coming out as a trans was far worse than saying I was gay. My parents would have preferred that because they had gay friends. They didn't know anybody who was trans. They only thought of them as campy stereotypes. Before I go into the specific details of training practices that I find that are helpful for working with these students, it's important that as educators we create an atmosphere that supports trans-identified and gender non-conforming students. The first thing we need to do is confront our gender conventions, so we create a more gender-inclusive learning environment where all students feel free to be themselves. A safe zone must be created so these students feel at home and respected. Many gender-variant students have been repeatedly misunderstood and unnoticed. We're in a culture where heterosexuality and cisgender identity are the norm and assumed, right? Every day these students have their identity erased from them on a daily basis. They go and fill out a form, male, female, right? I understand that. Every time I go and fill out a form about my husband, I don't have a husband, but I think it would even hit me more deeply when I was trying to check that other box that has to do with gender. Gender isn't abstract, and in many of your classes you teach there will be somebody who's questioning their gender. Avoid using heterocentric language, mother, father. Switch it up. Parents. Not all families have one mother or one father. Don't say guys and gals. Whenever possible, say you or everybody. That's probably going to be more appropriate. I try to honor the name that they may have picked. I say it all the time, every time I speak to them, so that they feel honored. I try to hold up role models like Laverne Cox. Are you familiar with that one on Orange is the New Black? Don't try to pick up negative images or campy characters. There's a wonderful collective in LA, some of you may know of it, Kilroy, and they're a collective of, and they collect plays of women of color and trans playwrights, and you can get an entire list every year of plays that are written by trans playwrights and women, and so I refer the students to look there. There's a monologue there for you. Now, of course, it may be New York oriented and LA oriented, but don't make assumptions about the sexuality of your students either, or their gender. Try to learn some of the variations, hear different things, read different things. Transgender, someone who does not identify as the gender that they were assigned with at birth. Transsexual, that's a term that is considered outdated, right? And every website you go to will say something different, so it's really important that you work with that student because they may have come at it from a different way. When we say binary or non-binary, there's so many variants in that. A non-binary is a person who doesn't identify solely as a male or a female. It can be an umbrella term, an identity in its own right. Some common non-binary terms, and this is not a list that's completely exclusive, androgynous, androgyny, which may be neutral or mixed with something else, agender, may be genderless or gender, lacking gender traits, genderqueer, a non-binary gender which expresses sitting outside society's gender norms, a demi-boy, a demi-girl, feeling partially one gender, male or female, and partially some other. Bigender, experiencing two gender identities, either at the same time or moving between the two. Neutros, a neutral gender identity, often lacking in gendered traits. Gender fluid, moving between two or more gender identities. Gender, pangender, identifying as all genders. And some non-binary people may not mind you saying he or she. They might want they, or co, or something else. Find out how they want to be referred to. I had a tough time with this. I would always say he or she, and I would say, correct me. And then I beat myself up about it. But after a while, I got the hang of it, and you can too. So try to create that comfort in languaging, and I think that's a place to start. But when we talk about performance training, what kinds of pedagogy can be helpful? I've had my entire career training mostly a diverse actor population. Our university, Florida International University, grants more degrees to Hispanic students than any other university in the United States. And most recently, I've been working with, doing research with my colleague Rebecca Covey on working with neurodiverse students, and now really trying to really look at trans students and non-binary students. But when working with all of these diversities, I can tell you that I have a basic pathway that I follow, and I'm not sure that it's any different from the things that you do. But what I do is I spend more time on the areas that I believe that might assist them in their differences, so that we, as my colleague likes to say, that I do the research with neurodiversity, level the playing field, so that the student can become more relaxed and grounded and comfortable with the self, to assist with really connecting to that true self-image. Trans students, often their inner and outer are not working together. They may feel one way on the inside, one way on the outside, and they're not perceived as they would like to be. So we're trying to get them more comfortable physically, because there's often an extra mask that must come off. And it comes with breath for me, and space, moving through the space. What I've noticed a lot of the time is that students who are struggling with self-identity, when I ask them to work at moving through space, they have a little bit of what I call the lost dog syndrome. You know how sometimes you see a little lost dog and it goes around in a circle and it doesn't know where to go and it goes around in a little circle. So then I start really working at finding places where they directly move to a spot. It's straight Laban work, but really directing them to point an arrow and go to that spot and ground in that space and be able to move to that space. even students who aren't struggling with this, we know, right? We're directing them, we say cross over there, and they're 10 feet away. So everyone needs that awareness of spatial awareness. But I spend more time on that if I know that I see that in the class. I'm always looking, right? If I see something that's dying to come out, you know, because things have been suppressed. Maybe there's a gesture that's really dying to come out that I see them suppressing. I say, find something physically that you want to let out, and let's exaggerate it, let's make it bigger, and share that with the person across the way. And then they'll do it back to you, and you do it back to them. And then we might create sort of a project runway where they show that off, that part that's small, that they want to really let out. And then we use Michael Chekhov or can radiate it so that they get sense of presence. I asked them, I stole this from Moni Akeem. He has an exercise where you show a part of your body that you don't feel comfortable with, and you make it bigger, and you make it bigger. And then it is not something that you're afraid of anymore. And I have the students do that. And then I ask them to pick a part of their body that they love and show that off, along with that gesture that might be trying to come out. And once those, I try to get them to use sound with that, add some words, music, of course, if we're doing sort of this project runway thing that we do. And then I begin to get into the traditional things of working on alignment and working with yoga and grounding and neutral mask. And we all know that some of these neutral masks, you go and you order them from these people that have these little things, and they're male or female neutral mask, right? What is that? Okay, so I try to get one of all, and then they're all the same. And then I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner, and I use a lot of that, because what does it do? It allows the student to really connect to these little small intricacies in their movement, and allows them to learn how to do functional movement better. And it really understands allows them to understand how to make the bones support the body rather than the muscles being the bones, so that they can learn to move the way they were biologically meant to move. And in voice class, I have them, when we're working with pitches, I don't say men you're here, females you're here, like, because we know there's an octave difference. I say, identify which area of the range you feel most comfortable in, right? If you feel comfortable at this octave, then you go there. If you feel comfortable at this octave, when we're working the pitches, you go there. The Chekhov work is fantastic, because sometimes those sensations in the body have been so masked and they're just needing to come out. And the psychological gesture is fantastic. As you said, the Meisner work is so good, because they've often lost the ability to connect. Someone did yesterday the adjudicated acting exercises, Tracy Moore, connect in the eyes, because that little lost puppy thing does not know how to connect in the eyes. Character work, really get them going, big characters, use those character masks and half masks, because it gets the voice really out there. And last but not least, time work. Because if you're working from some little clockwork, you're exploiting the part of yourself that's most vulnerable. And that's what they need to do, to find that home in themselves and in our training. I think that we can help and honor this and give them that sense of home. I know I found my sense of home in this training, and I'm sure some of you did. And it's our responsibility to do that. And I know that working with all these students in difference has helped me to embrace the differences in myself as a gay woman, learning disabled, and also neurodiverse, married to a woman with adopted son who is biracial and neurodiverse. He's black, he's part Indian, and part white. And that's all I invite you today. Thank you.
Sure. assignment description if you want to take a peek at that. But this mostly emphasizes things I've talked about: character desires, letting strong feelings flow, no bad guys, everybody has some complexity. Oh, also, that when dealing with social identity, the goal wasn't to find out my identity so I could match it in my character. I might find my identities so I could say, you know what, there just aren't any trans characters. I want to represent that. Or, oh my gosh, I'm always the African American. I want to play something else. Or, so that they could have some choice in that and to recognize what they want to take from there and what they want to explore something different. There were some great collaborations that I think made this project much more successful. I'll do reverse order on the slide. The 2 teaching assistants were vital, not just because they could give attention to different groups in a way that I couldn't be reading all the scenes and reviewing, being at all the rehearsals. These 2 TAs were fantastic. They also had social identities that contrasted mine. I had an African American student who'd taken the class who wanted to be a TA, and a non-binary student who wanted to be a TA. And having those folks in a position of power in the class, I can't tell you, you can imagine how much that helped you. Haley, can you describe this next activity? And it changed the dynamic in the room. We also collaborated with the costume design students. They got the scenes, they didn't know who wrote the scenes, but they got the scenes and had to do design research and visual research based on what they read. And then the students got to see how somebody else interpreted the scenes they'd written. So here's an example. These are just stolen directly from the costume students' work. So we've got Amber, and this student read the scene and came up with this. So you get a strong sense of what Amber is like, right? Well, wait till you see what happens when Amber meets Clay. Oh, it's just going to be a great scene, you can tell. And this is a great example. This scene wasn't so different than a scene you might see in a scene of a book of scenes, right? It wasn't crazy about identity, but there was clarity in the contrast between them, and these 2 students had to think about identity, and it came through in what we see visually from the costume students. This one, I'll talk about now a few of the different examples of scenes. This one, and the titles are all from what the students had. My son's a dancer. They're always very, very dramatic titles. The mother wants the son to become a lawyer. He wants to dance. The son is played by an African American male, and the mother is a white woman. The twist was the son had gotten his girlfriend pregnant, and that was part of his reason for wanting to stay at the local dance studio and teach. And it led to a discussion with the actor about reinforcing and challenging stereotypes. And it's another example of, I would not have assigned a scene or created a scene or suggested this twist. It came from the actors working together. And here's a quote from the male student's reflection paper. I wanted to bring out the seemingly timelessness of a teenage character and mix it with some elements of adulthood that I have recently discovered. What I didn't realize, for better or worse, is that it embodied the stereotype of a young black male. Honestly, throughout this whole process, I didn't consider this part of my identity, which is strange because it is the most important part of my identity. So I would say that he was eventually considering this, and he and I had conversations, and with the scene partner as well, about that. In fact, to be honest, I probably tried to, at some point, are you sure you want to do that? And steer him away from that, which, what helped about this whole process was, in a way, taking me out of the equation of being the decider of these things. If it happened in this way, I can live and learn from that, and so hopefully can the student. Danny, this is the dancer. And also in the costume representations, you see how what people look like, skin color comes up in when you look at a script. And so this is healthy for the costume designers and the students to see what's happening in there. And here's the mother from the costume design person's perspective. Gay problems, another great title. This is a same-sex couple in an otherwise typical lover's quarrel. Delightful scene. But they got to explore the identity and the scene in the way they wanted to, which was delightful. It was a very strong scene. Here's the costume visual research for the two characters in Gay Problems. Kind of a fun shirt here, I'll let you read. Then have a giggle. Leaving the nest. This was a scene, the basic premise was a daughter asked her father permission to attend college. The part of the identity that I'll focus on here is Lynn, the student who played Nancy, the daughter in a working class family. Again, this is costume visual research. John, the father in a working class family. It's great, the contrasting there. This is a quote from the student reflection paper, and Lynn was this international student from Vietnam. Quote, Playing her helped me learn a little bit of a problem a person in a working class family in the US may have to deal with. Playing Nancy in this setting also gave me a little peek into the parent-children's dynamic in another country. As in Vietnam, I never imagined having such a long monologue with my parents, and I'm still intact. Based on conversations, I interpret that as her parents would never let her express herself as strongly, and I can just picture where she was on stage to her father about, I am going to school and I'm going to study. And so that, I think, is what she means by, and I'm still intact. Complications. This seemed really, more than any of the others, embodied what I was hoping for the experiment. There were many small things along the way in different scenes, a character who went by they, them, that you wouldn't really notice until I talked to them after reading the scripts. But this one, Complications, great titles. A couple discusses an opportunity to relocate for a job offer. And this student who you're seeing on your left really took over. I mean, Abby did a fine job, but she was the straight person in the scene. Well, she was a gay character, but she bit the straight person and she let everything happen to her. But the other actor just got so passionate and just wrote and wrote. The scene was like 20 minutes long the first time, so I said, yeah, cut this. Which is another great thing about this process. You can cut it down and have the scenes kind of match the student interest. She had long monologue, she had things to interject. We'll go right to the quote from the student reflection paper. Going into this project, I wanted to do a scene revolving around the identity of being gay and having overbearing parents pushing their child towards the heteronormative way of life. And it was, this was a case where there was a part of her identity she just wanted to push out there and explore, and this goes back to the very first day of class. I remember we talked about identity, and hers was all about, I'm a gay woman, and she just was right there, and it was then in the final project came out and she had a chance to really express this. On the day of the performance, her grandma came, and she didn't know her grandma came. Her dad told her grandma, and she was freaking out. She's like, my grandma's here. And she was, she'd have a nice drama. And she doesn't know I'm out. And I said, do you want to do the scene? Oh yeah, I want to do the scene. So it was an exciting day. Here's the costume visual research for Franny, and then Claire. And we get this sense. I mean, for me, it's healthy. Here, I might say something like these two gay women, right? But here, with the visual research, you get the difference within that, the intersectionality of the different parts of the identity represented from them reading the script. I'll move to my lessons learned and takeaways. The TAs made a big difference in scene support and rehearsals, and also bringing different social identities into class leadership. The costume collaboration was really fantastic, and I would bring them in earlier. It was like so many things that kind of, through emails and changing and schedules, it came later in the process. It was such a great part, I would make sure to have that in place earlier. I think also social identities I could have emphasized earlier in the semester. Sometimes with an experiment you think, I don't know if this is going to work, and it kind of rolls out slowly. Now I feel like I would say, this is class, I've done this before, it can work, you're going to do it. I have that confidence. Students expressed in feedback that we could have had more time, spread the work of the scene more over the semester. Maybe it's not fair. I push back a little because I find that students, if they have a week, they'll do it in the last 3 days. If they have a month, they'll do it in the last 3 days. So, and it felt like it could be done, but I want to take that into my consideration, maybe layer it out a little bit more. The public performance, the scenes were delightful for the audience to see. They weren't boring, dumb, poorly written scenes. They were somewhat, sometimes cliche, but seeing the actors dig into it and seeing their connection with it was a delight for the audience. And also, I think that the concept brought people in to see it. It was easy to publicize. So I do plan to learn from and try this experiment again in the future. It addressed a lot of the things that were driving me bonkers about scene assignments. I thank the students from the class, the TAs, and Lauren Rourke, the costume teacher, and the members of the costume design class. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Design representation. When we were putting this together, we actually had another panelist who had dropped out, so we were thinking about how much we had to pack into our 90 minutes. And I invited all of us to put things into the slideshow if we wanted to, and give you a web address, in fact I'm following on my phone, to check out anything that you wanted to follow up on after the presentation. And now we'll move to Boone Hopkins who I've had the pleasure of knowing for years, mostly from these kinds of conferences, an associate professor of theater at Converse College. And Bruno, I'll let you take it over from here.
Thank you, John. My paper today is titled Actor Training Through Transgender Performance. In scene 10 of F2M by Patricia Weddick, Parker responds, "I'm scared. I'm scared most of the time. But I want to know what is real. I'm walking towards what feels real to me." Today, I want us to consider the acting studio as a space for rehearsing meaningful exchanges in the face of fear. Exchanges that participate in larger systems of power, but are capable of resisting collapses in the stalemates of ideological gridlock. I teach, direct, and am an arts administrator at a private women's college in South Carolina. At Converse College, like many women's colleges, including institutions such as Hollins, Mount Holyoke, and Mills College, the transgender movement has impacted admissions processes, student life, and alumni college relations. I offer that the problematic gap between institutional policy and lived experience of students can be productively explored through the mechanisms of actor training. I locate this gap by mapping challenging conversations about gender performativity in two sites: policy meetings of the President's Cabinet at my college, and our work in the acting studio with a group of students as we engaged Patricia Weddick's 2011 play, F2M. On May 13, 2016, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights released a Dear Colleague letter addressing a school's obligations regarding transgender students. On September 9, 2016, the President's Cabinet met to reevaluate our policies. Converse was founded as a single-sex institution with the mission articulated by our founder that, quote, "the well-being of a nation depends on the education of her women," end quote. Given this mission and our over 125-year history of educating women from South Carolina, across the U.S., and generations of international students, the college currently occupies a pivotal moment in our history. From its radical roots of educating women that initiated a progressive institutional agenda at our founding in 1889, the college also holds in its history more parochial periods, beginning in the 1920s, when large cast iron gates and brick walls were erected around our campus, separating the college from the city of Spartanburg. In this era, the college was a place to cloister one's daughter away, free from the fear of unwanted influences. At this moment, the college is balancing its identity between these ends. Are we a radical space for progressive confrontations of thought, or a safe space to learn without distraction? Our faculty would say the former. Our parents would say the latter. Our admissions team would say both. As we negotiate our identity, we aim to engage broad constituencies, from trustees and alumni to parents and students, which includes some students who seek the twin set and pearls of Converse in the 1950s, and some trans male students who identify strongly with the Converse sisterhood. In light of the Dear Colleague letter, our president brought forward our admissions policies and invited conversation about how the policy was serving the college. The responses began with a long explanation about the complexity of the issue from a colleague in admissions. A second colleague then responded, "What about the showers? How do we assure that this student isn't trying to sneak a peek in the bathroom?" Some of those gathered at the table chuckled at this comment. But one of my colleagues who did not laugh responded by asking, "Why do we assume they want to take a peek? Are we afraid they're predators or something? I'm more worried about how the trans student's going to feel in our outdated showers without any privacy." This shift in perspective silenced the room, and by identifying with the student rather than othering him, my colleague engaged the compassion and empathetic potential of the cabinet. The original speaker shifted her approach and responded, "Right, I'm just afraid it would be awkward for both students." From the new recognition of the challenges associated with being a transgender student at a single-sex institution, we began to edit our policy. We removed policy regarding determination of when a student has received hormone treatment that a previous dean had enacted. The current cabinet agreed that forcing a student to report to the college through his peers a decision to seek hormone treatment is inappropriate. We also removed the impossible burden placed on a student to prove that he had not been taking hormones. Proving a negative in this case would be nearly impossible. At the President's recommendation, we also established a transgender task force, comprised of students, faculty, and staff selected to review our policy and culture. To promote community dialogue, the Department of Theater and Dance and in partnership with our ally student organization on campus, produced F2M this past January. As faculty, we frequently utilize studio productions as additional opportunities for training to supplement our very full liberal arts curriculum. These moments also greatly benefit students who are not cast in main stage productions and may need to cultivate more experience or technique. While the content of the piece is charged and culturally relevant, F2M as a play is a rich example of traditional realism that I find effective for beginning studio work with college actors. In response to the challenging positions transgender students occupy on our campus, and in light of the awkward conversations that they regularly endure, my aim as an acting teacher was to create a safe space in which gender expression was comfortable. We took time and care in early meetings and warm-up sessions to discuss preferred pronouns by each member of the team, and when questioned by some actors, we discussed why such care was necessary. We also explored the role of gender on college campuses and why colleges become the site for the expression of identity in new ways. The cast also happened to be studying the musical Fun Home in a colleague's script analysis course at the same time, and we were able to draw parallels between the experiences of the lead characters, especially with the representations of parents in both pieces. As we began to explore the text, we initially worked on presence and the ways to embody being with others in the scene. Toward this end, I mobilized the work of Joseph Chaikin in dialogue with Meisner-based repetition exercises to encourage meaningful, deep exchange. Following Chaikin, we developed exercises that placed attention on spatial awareness and empathy. In one interaction, we would repeat the lines of the scenes and alternate between fulfilling and rejecting the expectations of the other character. For example, the actor working on Clarence, the father of the transgender college student, expects that his daughter is seeking attention, and he assumes that she is transitioning gender selfishly. What happens when Parker makes this the motive to be selfish? What is the opposite of selfish, and what happens when we allow that to inform the repetition? One actor astutely noted after the exercise that it's managing the space between what we feel like we're doing and how that is received. Rather than reinscribe gender normative behaviors for our studio work, be more masculine, take a more feminine approach, we tied behavior modifications to the ways the characters imagine that others might be perceiving them. A mistake I often make as an acting teacher is to assume that being fully engaged in doing something is actually being present. Chaikin reminds me, through this quote on the slide, that we give purpose to absent time when we engage empathetically in considering the actual expectations of others. In the first scene of F2M, the gender and sexuality of Parker and Lucy is explored. The key to the scene is intimately described through the following stage directions and dialogue. Parker re-enters, naked from the waist up. We see for the first time that Parker is female. Parker, where's my binding? Lucy, my side of the bed. Parker, right, forgot about last night. Lucy, that's not very nice, now my feelings are hurt. Parker, I'm not saying last night wasn't memorable. Lucy, better not be. Here, let me help you. Lucy begins to rack Parker. This intimate act of helping someone with their binding has a poetic beauty that I thought possessed dramatic poignancy in staging. As the company read through this scene in our first session, the anxiety of the actor playing Parker was palpable. Interrupting the reading, he asked, what are we going to do with that? I replied that we would work on this challenging direction together and encouraged the cast to keep reading. However, I noticed a quick, worried glance from the actor up to the ceiling in response to my vague deferral. As the reading continued, I was suddenly aware that I was missing something. I interrupted the work again to ask the actor what he was thinking about regarding the stage direction. And he mentioned a discomfort with the nudity, which I expected and for which I was planning to accommodate. However, the reasons for this discomfort were revelatory. He described his own experience with gender dysphoria and the ways that his own breasts made him feel vulnerable and not himself. The actor challenged the truth of the scene and whether or not Parker would allow his relatively new girlfriend to assist him with this act of dressing. As we discussed the relationship between the characters, our student dramaturg was confused, and the actor explained gender dysphoria and the ways it has defined his experiences. From fear to confusion and slowly to new ways of staging and honoring the embodied knowledge that everyone brought to the rehearsal space, We ultimately decided that the actor playing Parker would wear a base layer of a form-fitting gray t-shirt from his own closet and a flannel shirt that the actor playing Lucy would button to symbolize dressing Parker. Underneath all this, the actor would wear his own binding, and he moved slowly from a place of observable fear to what I perceived as engaged intimacy with Lucy in this charged moment. The public performance of F2M at Converse College initiated further discourse within our community. In this production, we presented a focused exploration of a transgender character played by a transgender performer, a first for us. The piece generated rich conversation among faculty colleagues, including members of the newly formed Transgender Task Force who attended the event. Since the performance, I've noticed the addition of new non-binary or trans male students declaring majors or minors in theater in the months since the production. Our department of approximately 48 theater and musical theater majors now includes 6 students who self-identify as trans male or non-binary in our women's college. I'm not suggesting that one stage reading can count as substantive change, and we still have real work to do at our college. But F2M raised generative questions, including how can we welcome transgender playwrights into our season? How can we respond to the needs of transgender performers in training? And in my own studio classes, how am I listening when the bodies around me speak? Ultimately, I suggest that the process of advocating for and cultivating empowerment with transgender performing bodies in acting studios can work as powerful tools for broader institutional change. While we may not be able to impact the recalcitrant perspectives of some colleagues, alumni, or legislators, we are facing the fear that limits perspective and rehearsing our own potential to transcend. Through a fluid exploration of identity on all college campuses, we may be able to put into performative action what my institution's founder, Dexter Edgar Converse, articulates as a guiding mission: to see clearly, decide wisely, and act justly. Thank you.